think even the Americans do not expect.
But their foreign policy is not really something that we admire.
But
at least I don't.
But my sense is on the international law and the record of the last 100 years, where actually it is considered an international state, Iran has no right to stop. But what Iran is doing, Americans are fighting a conventional military war. As you said, Iran is fighting a political war of using its leverage over the strait.
Has no business to decimate a nation, no business to kill people like this. I think that any right-thinking nation should stand up and say, this is wrong. This is what I think. Raghavan, what do you say? We have an existential threat, no?
They all feel an existential threat from the other.
I mean, Israeli talks about that we have an existential threat. But I think Iran has an existential threat because Israel has been saying that we will decimate them, we'll finish them.
So this is, you're not dealing with a normal set of relations.
That's right.
And the question really, therefore, is that how should you position yourself to cause least damage to your interests? Some damage is inevitable. Right. Nobody has come out of this whole fracas unscathed.
Again, these are very extreme positions. So I don't think they'll be reconciled in a hurry. But what perhaps, and just perhaps, is can we revisit what was agreed before Feb 28?
Yes.
And see if that is a starting point for the kind of paddling that you're talking about. That we have three very angry ducks which are spitting missiles at each other, but there's paddling going on, below the water that we perhaps don't know, and we hope.
Let me go back to the pre-Trump era. After all, Israel had the same position about Iran, even in the pre-Trump era, but none of the previous presidents were willing to do what Israel wanted them to do.
Yeah.
Namaskar. In this episode of Dil Se, we'll be talking about the continuing events that are taking place in the Israeli-US-Iranian conflict. And every day the goalpost changes. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And ever since Trump has come to power, since January 20th, 2025, the global order seems to have changed radically, both the economic global order and the political global order. Sometimes President Trump says, okay, we're giving you 48 hours and then we will finish you. And thereafter he says, okay, we paused it for 5 days and let's deal with the matter. And then he says, we're sending our troops in and they'll occupy the islands. He's sending their Marines in. And we don't know really what's happening. And in the meantime, the attacks are taking place. Drones are being fired, missiles are being fired, bombers are being sent. And quite frankly, with precision strikes, Iran has been, in several senses, annihilated in terms of its power. But this is an asymmetric war. I don't think Iran can win that war. That's my own personal opinion. But at the same time, if Iran prolongs that war, and that's the strategy of Iran, that to impact the economic order of the world, deprive them of essentials, which are fuel to economic growth in various parts of the world. And if they Iran squeezes the global community, barring China and Russia, which it has great relations with, it's going to impact the US. Inflation is going to rise. The global economy is going to suffer. Growth is going to come down. Employment would be affected. The source materials for agriculture, for steel, for aluminum, for textiles, plastic industry, all that will be impacted very seriously. And as far as India is concerned, and that's really what saddens me, India imports about 5 million barrels a day of crude. Approximately 3 million are sourced from the Middle East. The price of Middle East crude, blend of sweet and sour, is approximately today US dollars 160 per barrel. Premium over 60 over the North Sea Brent. Explanation is high Asian demand, but why such a differential? Now, the arithmetic is that we are spending incrementally US dollars 270 to $300 million per day as a result of the conflict. And in addition to that, the impact on higher priced urea is 50% higher, LNG, LPG, sulfur, and helium. If this continues, we will face supply shortage, we will face hoarding, black marketing, stagflation, high interest rates, falling FDI, and we have stocks only for 7 to 8 days, whereas countries like China have stocks for 120 days, Japan 208 days, South Korea 200 days. Now the irony is that we are close both to Israel and to the United States. And in the speech in the Knesset, when recently Modi ji went, it was in full support of Israel in every sense of the word, unlike what he said in Parliament the other day. Now, the fact of the matter is that if this war continues for a long period of time, who are Israel and the United States hurting the most? India. It's the action of our friends is hurting India the most. And they never took this into account when they launched this attack. And that's the irony, that we are friendly with these countries and their actions are hurting us. And Iran is only trying to prolong the war by using an asymmetric system of war, and you know it better. The fact of the matter is that Iran has a decentralized system of operations. In other words, if you kill somebody at the center, it doesn't really matter. The 332-odd provinces, I believe, where decentralization has taken place, take their own decisions and don't have to go to the central authority as such. So we're going to discuss all these aspects, especially in the context of our foreign policy, where we might have sort of not really been futuristic enough to understand as to what the consequences of this war have been. But you remember, despite all this, Iran is willing to supply oil to India, willing to supply oil to China and a couple of other countries as friendly countries. And I think Iran needs to do that because it will be depleted of their economic resources. So we have three extraordinary people to be with us today who will discuss many of these issues. Thank you, TCA Raghavan. Please, you're a Foreign Service Officer of 82 batch, retired in 2015, got a PhD in economic history from JNU, expert in South Asia and political, in these strategic studies, and you have been in Pak as the Deputy High Commissioner, then High Commissioner in Pakistan in 2009-13. You've been the JS Pak Afghanistan Iranian desk, so you know the complexities of these issues. You've otherwise been to Kuwait, UK, Bhutan, and of course, you've written fiction as well as non-fiction, and your books are widely read. Thank you very much for being here. I have with me today a military expert who's going to give us a view as to what are the military consequences of what's happening out there. Commodore Uday Bhaskarji, thank you very much for being here. You're one of the India's most foremost experts in security and strategic affairs, particularly in maritime, nuclear, and international security domains. And you joined the NDA way back and were commissioned into the Indian Navy, served for 37 years in the Indian Navy, and retired. And then, of course, deeply involved in the IDSA, right from 1989, later became a director of IDSA. And also, you are currently the director in the Society for Policy Studies in New Delhi, focusing on independent research in security and foreign policy. You've been a member of the Member Secretary of the Government of India Task Force on Global Strategic Developments, and you've held influential positions in India in areas of security. You're also a visiting scholar in McGill University, and of course in Italy, in Pavia, University of Pavia. So thank you very much for being here. And what can I say about Raja Mohan? Every time I think of foreign policy of India, I ring him up and say, please come over because you're the expert in this area. Very few people have the kind of knowledge and the depth of knowledge, the breadth of knowledge that you have. You are the founding director of the Carnegie India in New Delhi, 6th such international center of Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, distinguished fellow of the ORF, senior fellow of the Center for Policy Research, New Delhi, professor of South Asian Studies in JNU, and of course, you're an expert in national security affairs. You're a member of the National Security Advisory Board and were the Henry Alfred Kissinger Chair in Foreign Policy and International Relations at the Library of Congress, Washington. We read your articles every day, every other day. You're writing about foreign policy and what it means in the context of this conflict for India. So thank you all for being here. Let me start with you, sir. What do you think is going to happen?
Well, nobody quite knows. I think right now we appear to be in a pause where both sides are trying to see if they can, after 3 weeks of pretty intense conflict, now find some middle ground, which was obviously not there earlier. I think in the past 3 weeks, in fact longer than that, both sides have realized that this conflict has consequences which they did not fully anticipate. The Americans and the Israelis certainly do not appear to have been ready for such a prolonged period of combat. I think the Iranians also are conscious of the great damage which their country and their society is facing. So at one level, it appears to be a pause to see if they can find some middle ground.
But this 15 point the Americans have suggested, it doesn't seem to be something that the Iranians are going to buy.
I think both the Iranian and the US initial positions are more as negotiating starts. I don't think these will be the final outcomes. But in the beginning, it is customary, although it's unusual that after such an intense phase of conflict to come out with demands which are unlikely to be conceded. But nevertheless, I think that these are initial, but perhaps the real discussions will be on other issues. And possibly there is an expectation that they may be able to find a way out, but it depends really on the internal assessments of each of the parties. About that, we don't know that much. You see, there is a minority view that this is no more than a pause, and both sides are using this to get ready for the next next phase.
Yes.
But where exactly we stand, therefore, it's very difficult to say. I would say that things are possibly balanced on a knife's edge and could go either way.
Well, let me ask you a further question. When the 12-day war in June took place, when America attacked the nuclear facilities, he said, we've accomplished everything, right? And that they have no, enriched fuel left, and we've destroyed everything. Now, suddenly that's become a talking point that Iran should not give a promise that they will not have nuclear weapons. And then they say that you give an undertaking that you will, do this, you will not do that. How is that possible?
You see, I think the US administration, after a long gap in its public postures, the present administration is not process-driven. They are not basing what they are saying on being consistent. It's much more of an improvised situation that they face a certain situation and they will say something. But if one is to look at the positives and see what is the common meeting ground, one possible common meeting ground is that Iran has always said that we have no intention of making nuclear weapons.
Yes.
So their position has never been that we are not going.
Not now, never. That's
Never.
what they said.
That is their position. So that provides the basis for people to work towards a middle
But that
ground.
they said earlier.
That they said earlier, because we should also not forget that each of the parties, their mutual relationships are deeply visceral. And it's something we find it difficult to understand if you apply rational scheme of calculation. These are very, very elemental relationships on all sides. And that, I think, adds to the element of unpredictability to this particular situation.
Because of the element of distrust for both sides to each other.
Distrust, there are strategic issues. And over the past 40, 45 years, certainly there is a there's an element of, it's much more than distrust. There's an element of this zero-sum mentality that we cannot allow the other to exist, at least in our region.
Now, let me ask you, Udayji, you're a military strategist, you know exactly what's happening. What do you think in terms of military outcome that's possible in the context of the fact that the Americans sending Marines? They also realize that maybe they'll occupy the South Islands, south of Iran, but that exposes the Marines to their being, killed even.
Oh, absolutely.
So what are the consequences of this kind of strategy?
If we look at the trajectory of the war, it will enter the 5th week on Saturday, 28th of March. And in many ways, if you look at what has happened in the past 5 weeks and what may happen in the next week or two, I would say that number one, the scale of destruction, that starting from the early phases of epic fury, the Israelis and the Americans were able to use their superior ordnance delivery capability, meaning the aerial bombardment, the use of missiles. And to pick up what Raghavan has just said, the initial assumptions seem to have been totally off the mark, meaning that there was an assumption that they could wrap this up in the first 2 weeks.
That's correct.
And once that's done, there'd be a regime change and perhaps a scaling up of the Venezuela model. But that did not happen.
Right.
And from week 3 onwards, you see Iran regrouping and Iran's ability to strike.
Right.
And one military red line, which I think was crossed, was around the 21st of March, when Iranian ordnance was able to reach Israel, and particularly in and around Dimona, their nuclear, shall we say, assets.
Yes.
And I think that was a significant punctuation. And after that, I think both Israel and America have been forced to rethink that early assumption that they had degraded Iran militarily, not now, but in 2025, the 12-day war that you're talking about.
Yes.
So I think there's been a case of, re-looking at the military kind of options. And that's when you see Trump asking the Marines to come in. So they have moved number 11 MEU 31 aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln in the Arabian Sea, Indian Ocean, and also a sense that they might now mount this assault on the Karg Island. So number one is the destruction that has happened over the last 4 to 5 weeks. Iran's ability to deliver ordnance, not only to Israel, but the other Arab nations that have US bases. And what has happened now in countries like UAE, Dubai, Bahrain, Saudi, is one of the consequences of the military outcome of the war. Destruction to assets, instability, and a sense of anxiety, panic, which has its own strategic ramifications that you can't trust the US to give us that foolproof umbrella.
Right.
Looking ahead, I would say that much would depend on the kind of decision President Trump takes about getting the US military involved in a more direct way. At the moment, there is no direct contact. It's all missiles, aerial, and the anxiety that the Iranians may use their proxies.
That's correct.
As of now, the entire focus is on the Hormuz. If, and this is a hypothetical scenario, the Iranians are able to motivate the Houthis to do their bit in the Red Sea, then you will have a pincer in terms of global energy, global trade. And we come back to the human security consequence of a military action, which is the 3F syndrome, that is fuel, fertilizer, and food.
Right.
And this will start kicking in after, the expert kind of assessment coming out is that by the time we come to day 100, which is in roughly week 14, 15, I think the human security dimension is going to become far more grave and dangerous than what it is today. Now we are talking about gas cylinders in India, shortage, and all over South Asia.
Right.
There is now the impact of the fallout of the war. But if the United States decides to step up and militarily bring in the carriers, bring in naval power, bring in the Marines, and attempt an assault, which I personally think would be very imprudent, I think then Iran's ability to use its other options, the proxy options, and maybe escalate even horizontally in terms of whom it will target, is a high probability. And then, frankly, all bets are off. Because we are talking about...
it's a highly incendiary situation.
Very, very. I would say it's very, very dangerous at this point.
But Trump doesn't really want to have a full-blown war involving the American military and troops. And that's why he's telling the alliance partners that why you're not supporting me, right? And they are not keen to do that. So I wonder whether Trump is going to take that option. At the moment, I think this is a posture to threaten the Iranians that you better come to terms, otherwise I'll do something.
Yeah, I think that word that you used is right, sir, the posture. Because if you read Trump and his whole psychology, one of his things is about the art of the deal, which is that you push the adversary or the interlocutor to the absolute edge. And then, like PCA was saying, you look at the backdoor diplomacy and the other options and pedal back.
You're actually attributing too much rationality to someone who doesn't, at least doesn't appear to be rational. But Raja, let me come to you. In the context of what's happening here, where should our foreign policy have been? Did we make the right calls in terms of our relationships?
I think to understand the calls we made, it's important to note how much India's policy towards the Middle East has changed in the last decade. Now, Israel, for example, the Congress party, it was the one which actually recognized the Israelis' full diplomatic relations.
Right.
But there's always a hesitation to go the full distance with Israel.
Right.
No Indian Prime Minister had visited Israel and no Israeli Prime Minister had come to India. But I think when the BJP came to power, they were very clear, we're going to build a solid relationship with Israel.
Right.
And I think on the technology side, on the defense side, the scale and intensity, which all began under the Congress rule.
Right,
but I think in the last 10 years, that has become much more.
I myself went to Israel.
Much more. You are in the Science and Technology Ministry, and I think it became much more intense. That's one point. The second, I think, is the transformation of India's relationship with the Gulf Arab countries. See, going back to the 1990 invasion of Kuwait, Iraq's invasion of Kuwait, and our Prime Minister that I'm hugging, Saddam Hussein, the Kuwaitis, that relationship was normalized only about a year ago when Prime Minister Modi finally went to Kuwait. But what has changed is really deeply was India's relationship with Saudi Arabia, India's relationship with the United Arab Emirates. These two have become major economic partners for India, major investors in India.
Right.
Because what's happened, the Gulf has become a rich place.
Right.
That is, today the money in Qatar, Saudi and UAE, of course, let's see how much survives this war. But I think their capacity today, financial capacity, almost equal to London, New York, Hong Kong, level of money that exists. And money is looking to be invested. So I think we've seen that.
The future financial capitals of the world, if
absolutely.
everything had gone off,
survives.
would have been these areas. Yes.
So in a way, I think Prime Minister Modi built a personal kind of rapport with the sultans. I mean, and I think that has worked to some extent. And if you remember, the UAE at one point had invited Sushma Swaraj to address the OIC meeting, Organization of Islamic Conference meeting. And when India changed its position on Kashmir in August 2019, the UAE is one of the few countries that supported India.
And in fact, Iran was not in support of India at that point.
And then you had actually the first country to say, look, we'll invest something in Kashmir. Right. So in a way, our stakes, purely, irrespective of the political side, the economic stakes with both Israel and the Gulf had increased. And at the political level, there was a new bonhomie. And then they were willing to support you in a way that previous... in the past, I think we always talked about Arab solidarity, but I think our political class, I'm talking about the pre-Modi years, was never comfortable with the dynamic within the Arab world. Finally, I would say what has changed also is the Abraham Accords, where a section of the Gulf Arabs were now normalizing ties with Israel. So the old framing that Arabs versus Israel does not apply.
Right.
That actually they today, some of the Gulf Arabs, see Iran as a threat.
Right.
And not Israel actually. For them, their existential challenges come from Iran and not from Israel. Right. So I think the structural change that has taken place, and I think perhaps India saw this, look, these guys stood with us, therefore we're going to stand with them. I don't know if you saw the statement by the UAE officials in the last 2 days where they said, look, this is not enough to have a ceasefire. That existence of Iran and a revolutionary Iran that seeks to overthrow the existing order is a fundamental threat.
Right.
So I think it's really we're in a new situation, and I think given our stakes with Israel and the Emirates and the Gulf Arabs, We seem to have taken that into account in taking the opposition. But as you mentioned in the beginning, that is not that you still have some leeway with the Iranians because the size of your as a customer, as a neighbor, so they're willing to let go. And I think what's happened is, for all our talk about Iran, TCA was the joint secretary looking at Iran as well, that it never took off the economic relationship because they were under sanctions. What you could do with Iran was always constrained by Iran's quarrels with the Western world.
Right.
While with the UAE and with Saudi and the Israelis, the relationship has took off. So I think it is, if we take those weights into consideration, it's not difficult to see why we've signaled support for these two countries.
Okay, so basically what you're saying is that the geopolitical situation and relationships have changed. We found that India would be better served in our relationship with Israel and the United States and
Emirates,
the GCC countries than to push our relationship with Iran to the extent that we might have wanted to. But then the problem is, and this is the problem, which is why I want to ask you this question, the problem is that basically because of the Straits of Hormuz, because of our huge economic interests in terms of oil and in terms of gas, are supplied through the Straits of Hormuz, I think that we should have realized that some stage, if a conflict takes place, what are we going to do? Yeah. Right? And I think at that stage, that to be so completely aligned with Israel and the United States of America may not, according to me, may not be the best way to deal with the situation, because now you are not even in a position to in fact, help a deal come through. You have Pakistan, you have Turkey, and you have Egypt, who are the interlocutors now. So somewhere down the line, I think we took a very strong position. And the fact that we did not even condemn the killing of Khamenei is something that, that Iran will never forget. So I think there's a problem there, according to me. And maybe I'm wrong, but that's...
No, I think, countries do take the overall weight. As I said, Iran has not been too nasty to us.
Yes, exactly.
They might not forget it, they might not forgive it, but at this point, they're still engaged with us, and we are engaged with them. I think on the question of Straits of Hormuz, I think, which is what you mentioned just now, I think that is the key.
Yes.
I think 3 weeks ago, no one thought that would become the central issue. But today it is.
Well, foreign policy about thinking ahead, no?
Sure.
I'm going to come to you on that.
Sure. So, but I think I think clearly, I think even the Americans did not expect.
Well, their foreign policy is not really something that we admire. At least I don't.
But my sense is, on the international law and the record of the last 100 years, where actually it is considered an international state, Iran has no right to stop. But what Iran is doing, look, Americans are fighting a conventional military war. As you said, Iran is fighting a political war of using its leverage over the strait.
Has no business to decimate a nation, no business to kill people like this. I think that any right-thinking nation should stand up and say, this is wrong. This is what I think. Raghavan, what do you say?
Well, it's, we can put it in different ways. But if you assign a certain weightage to relationships, the weight which exists because of your relations with the Gulf, with Israel, and with the United States far outweighs any equities you are likely to have with Iran. And secondly, the fact that you have such large number of Indians in the GCC countries, that acts as a weight on policy making which you cannot underestimate.
Right.
Because there's no way those Indians can ever come out.
Right,
you see,
absolutely.
This is not even near the Kuwait situation during the first Gulf War, where you could ring fence and bring the Indians out. And that, in fact, the first Gulf War, you could see Indian policy being driven entirely by welfare issues concerning your Indian population there. So I think in this case, these factors have more or less predetermined the overall posture of the substance of your position. But I agree with you. I think there was scope for nuancing it. Certainly when that Iranian vessel got sunk after participating in an exercise in India, or when Khamenei was
and now the naval chief, the naval head has been assassinated. While they're talking, they're having a dialogue, the naval head has been killed.
Israel has done.
Yes.
But I want to add
But they do, but as I said, as we were discussing, these countries have a very, very deep highly a relationship based on animosity alone. There are no lengths which have held any of them back.
But within the GCC also, no one country.
But it lacks the cutting edge, for instance, of the US-Iran relationship from the days of the revolution. Can you imagine the embassy was stormed, their diplomats were held hostage for such a long period of time? So these are relationships, and Iran is on a different orbit altogether, because for them, on both sides, assassinations has been part of the way they conduct their normal business.
But they too have an existential threat, no?
They all feel an existential threat from the other.
I mean, Israeli talks about that we have an existential threat. But I think Iran has an existential threat because Israel has been saying that we will decimate them, we'll finish them.
So this is, you're not dealing with a normal set of relations.
That's right.
And the question really, therefore, is that how should you position yourself to cause least damage to your interests? Some damage is inevitable. Right. Nobody has come out of this whole fracas unscathed. But I would say that I think the sinking of that Iranian naval vessel, the assassination of Khamenei, required that we certainly nuance our position a bit. But you know, as I said, the weight of the Indians, 10 million of them, also makes you take positions which you may not like.
No, but the Iranians are not targeting the Indians. No. They are targeting the bases that the Americans have in those GCC countries for attacking Iran.
My feeling is that our real concern was about how the leadership in the GCC states would look at the Indians if our position was not totally inclined with them.
No, I don't think that you should be inclined towards A or towards B. I think at the right time you can criticize what has happened by killing of Khamenei. You can sort of at least through your words give some kind of succor. I'm only on that, because of course you're larger.
I think we should have certainly condoled the assassination of.
I want to add a couple of things here, sir. We talked about weightage as to why, and TCA as a very experienced diplomat has put this, and Raj. But I think there are some intangibles here, and I feel very strongly. So I thought I would like to bring it on the table here, that while there is this whole question about weightage and where the national interest lies, and this is a very valid argument, I think there's a texture to India's engagement with the region historically. Raj has given us all the detail of that. And I think our position, our profile has been tainted, strong word to use, tainted, mainly because we refused to do what would have been expected of a country like India. India has pedigree, India has depth, India has a history of a relationship not just with the region but globally. On that, not being able to condole the death of Khamenei when he was assassinated, again, I'm saying it very bluntly, he was assassinated by the Americans and the Israelis as part of Epic Fury, we said nothing. Then we had the IRIS Dina, the naval ship. Right. It was sunk just outside of India.
That's right.
Sailors went down. We did not sympathize. Even the code of the sailor that we should have reached out to them. And this is something which I find very difficult, because by all means you can go to the Israeli parliament, Prime Minister Modi went there, and it's very clear that India is now leaning closer to the Israel-US kind of position in the region and in this war in particular. But the fact that we could not, I think, nuance, to use the word that he said, and reach out. And what to me was even more dismaying is that the average Indian citizen, when they tried to sympathize, extend their condolences, even that they put a filter on it.
Oh,
the foreign secretary went much later.
Yeah, much later.
But the spontaneous kind of responses of people sympathizing with what had happened, the state ensured that, it was in a way kept below the median. And in Kashmir, when people wanted to send aid to those who were in distress in Iran, even that was not encouraged. And this is a 1.4 billion people. So on that, I feel very strongly that yes, the weight of foreign policy should be an objective clinical decision. But the whole, I would say, kind of position and what we associate with India, a certain degree of both principle, humanism, should be sort of be completely devoid of that. There I use the word again. I think we stand tainted in the, not just the Iranian eyes, but generally in the global community.
No, but I think that what both of you are saying is right. The national interest requires us to look at really the larger interests of India in the context of the positions we take. But is foreign policy only that, or is there any moral fiber to that as well? I mean, somewhere down the road, there is a moral fiber.
We could have
involved.
nuanced better.
I mean,
again,
Spain
we
said,
could have nuanced it better.
we're not going to side with you, right? Now, they say, but all Western countries are dependent on the US. But Spain took a position. President Lula took a position. Okay, he didn't succumb. So I think at some stage you're right. I am with you on the national interest, but there's also a moral dimension to it.
Say, for example, moral politic and real politic. I mean, I think there's always that tension.
Yes.
For example, our position on Ukraine. Not only we didn't condemn Russian invasion, but successive resolutions in the UN, we kind of ducked the issue because Russia is your friend. And not only that, I mean, a large part of the Indian elite was saying, Ukrainians deserved it, because they provoked Russia into attacking. So I think our record is not a neat one, as Bhaskar is trying to say, where we are always taking moral positions. Where your interest came in, it was tempered by the reality of, look, you couldn't alienate the Russians. Therefore, while you didn't like what Russians have done in Afghanistan earlier, in Hungary, Czechoslovakia, you had to temper down your moral...
I think there's a far more complicated situation as far as Russia's attacking Ukraine is concerned, quite frankly. There is a historical context to it. There is the issue that NATO should not come to the borders. There is the issue of Russian population in certain areas in the Ukraine, predominant population. So I think each conflict has its nuances, and I think we can't compare one conflict to another. But this is what the Gulf Arabs say,
look, from its birth, they were trying to undermine the Gulf kingdoms.
I agree with you.
So I think everywhere there is a context.
That's right. I'm just saying, where does India stand in that context? India would not, in the context of the Russian and the Ukraine conflict, there's a different context altogether. And in the past also this has happened. So I'm not in any case denigrating that. But I'm only saying that in the ultimate analysis, if Hormuz closes down in this fashion,
of course, that's it.
It will have disastrous consequences. And why would America and Israel not think of India when they are our closest allies? I'm only on that. They should have thought that, this can happen.
I think they didn't think many things through. That's very evident. But it's also possible that the Iranians didn't think many things through.
I agree entirely.
And I think the biggest, of course, the Iranians always assumed that the Americans would be taking the possible closure of the Strait of Hormuz into account when they do something major with Iran.
They were told that.
But
they were advised
but the Americans didn't do that. They didn't take it into account. So there is a failure of assessment on all sides. But on the question of our overall posture, I mean, as I said, I think the substance of your policy is more or less pre-decided. And the Indians alone would have pre-decided that for you. But I would agree that I think there is scope for nuancing it, for taking a certain position on some issues where you feel even the lines, even standards which are very low where Israel-Iran relations are concerned or US-Iran relations are concerned, but where even low standards have been breached, I think we should take a position.
But look at what Israel has done to the Palestinians. And look at our foreign policy and our foreign policy posture throughout till we change that position. We've said nothing about the kind of killings that have taken place. 72,000 people have died. Today, Israel is attacking the Hezbollah, and southern Lebanon is sought to be occupied by them. 1,000 people have already been killed out there. And Israel, supposing Iran loses this war, let's assume, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? There are 90 million people in Iran, about 97 odd million people. There are 27 million in the Gulf. Now, you can't throw out those 95 million people anywhere. The consequences will be horrendous. Which nation has thought of those consequences? Not America, not Israel, because Israel is only, Netanyahu is only concerned with one thing, to decimate.
I think there is a need. I think what you're pointing out is how do we construct an architecture where the interests of all countries can be taken into account. That I think would involve at least 2-3 broad things. I think one, the interference in the internal affairs.
Yes.
Where Iran's interference by using minorities, by using militias in other countries is a problem. So when today they talk about proxies, that's an issue.
But that's connected to
That's
Israelis
I'm coming to
listening
that. So
Palestine.
at the same time, you say, look, does Iran, as the largest country, it needs a say in the way the architecture is established. That too needs to be respected. I mean, I think TCA served in Singapore, where Indonesia, where the largest country, is willing to accommodate interests, and the others are willing to accommodate Indonesia's interests. So I think we need a fresh set of principles on which the last 47 years of the Iranian Revolution, you need some way of tempering and taking into account everybody's interests. Hopefully, I think all sides are also talking about a regional security architecture. Iran talks about it. Our Gulf Arab friends talk about it. So I think there might be a room as we begin to move towards engaging. I agree with TCA. There is scope for diplomacy here. As you said on Iran, saying there was a fatwa against making nuclear weapons, but they insist on the right to develop nuclear energy.
For peace.
Which actually, there's a way of finessing that. Missile program is a new element Americans have introduced. Then there is the question of proxies. So I think there is actually an Iran that is assured of non-intervention by the Americans. Would also have to reassure its neighbors that we're not going to mess around with your domestic politics. Right. So I think if this tragedy ends up in a new engagement on these ideas, I think this is something we need to support.
The greatest irony would be, if you remember, before Feb 28, under Obani sort of Sherpine, they almost reached an agreement between the United States and Iran, and apparently from whatever the
and America withdrew from
I know that Iran was willing to even give up more than what it had on the Obama plan, the JCPOA.
Zero stockpile.
And the Americans scuttled it.
Yes.
So today, if there's a new agreement, they'll have to go through many layers, including when Raj was talking, it just struck me, that at one of the conferences, the Saudi and the UAE position was that Iran is the head of the snake. If only that is cut, and this is serious stuff, they're talking about the ideology. They said something to that effect, right? Only then will we be able to have some kind of assurance that we would not be threatened again. These are very extreme positions. So I don't think they'll be reconciled in a hurry. But what perhaps, and just perhaps, is can we revisit what was agreed before Feb 28?
Yes.
And see if that is a starting point for the kind of paddling that you're talking about. That we have three very angry ducks which are spitting missiles at each other, but there's paddling going on, below the water that we perhaps don't know, and we hope.
Let me go back to the pre-Trump era. After all, Israel had the same position about Iran, even in the pre-Trump era. But none of the previous presidents were willing to do what Israel wanted them to do.
Yes, that is true.
That is true. And why is that? Because they were negotiating with Iran.
They were negotiating, and they did not want a major war in West Asia.
Exactly. They knew the consequences.
They knew the consequences.
Right. So it's Trump that changed everything.
So there is a new drift in U.S. policy.
That's right. And they don't want to involve any technical experts in the negotiations. That's the other problem.
The domestic politics of U.S. on the Middle East have changed in favor of Israel. And
that's right, and that's what led to the problem. And
without the institutional checks and balances that you saw in the Biden watch and in Obama have been completely removed by Mr. Trump, Donald Trump.
That's correct.
So now it's Monday morning. This is it will be on social media. Thank you for your attention. I am doing ABC. And on Tuesday morning, there'd be another sort of social media, as he says, full caps for emphasis.
And Congress is not consulted.
Exactly. So I think
where do we go from here if one person in the world takes decisions to create an upheaval to the world economic order, then surely somebody should stand up and say this is not right. But India is not the one that's going to say that, because that's in our national interest, I guess.
I think there are three broad directions, I think. One is same course, they'll continue to escalate both sides. All of us are going to pay a huge price. Second, some way a diplomatic engagement would begin, and that would open up some possibilities. Or the third option is actually there's someone inside actually would change the equations in Iran or in the US, where the domestic politics will begin to test the two governments and say that, look, the path you are on is unsustainable. So I would think these are the three broad ways in which we can imagine.
Killing people, I don't think domestic politics in Iran is going to change. In fact, what could have happened without intervention will not happen now. Because...
No, one is the big picture. I mean, what you're talking about. The other is, look, within the elite, they're taking enormous pounding.
Yes, of course.
At some point, a section of them say that, look, because after all, it's not, for all its coherence, there were different groups. A large section of the Iranians always wanted to do a deal with the Americans, whether anybody is left in that. So I would say how the use of force, I think, as you know, in any war, one of the big changes is the domestic politics of the combatants always gets affected. And I think that logic.
I think Trump is worried about that also because the
because
elections
there's no congressional
corner. So they don't.
The trigger could be the price of gas.
Yes.
The moment it crosses $4,
Yes.
I think the domestic mood in the US and the elections for the Congress, that may compel. But I agree with you, sir, on this, that I think the Iranian position internally is going to become more resolute. Everything that you look at, while there are different factions, for them, for the regime, for the clerical regime now, it's do or die.
Yes.
So I think they will ensure that all the levers of power that they have, after all, they control the gun in Iran, between the Revolutionary Guard and the other militias, they will ensure that there'll be no faction that will emerge. So to that extent, I think it's a clash of two strategic cultures. One is 7,000 years of Persian history, and the other is roughly 7 years of Trump and his presidency, meaning term 1, 4 years, and the other 3 that he has. The kind of very, I think, peculiar strategic culture that he exudes, just Donald Trump, DJT. I think that's going to be the clash that will play out.
I think the problem for us is that you are confronted with a situation over which you have very little control.
That's true.
And which is going to damage you regardless of what is the final outcome.
True.
Now, in those circumstances,
What do we do?
What do you do? Should you be like boy stood on the burning deck and condemn openly?
No,
or
you condemn nothing. I don't think you should condemn.
Yeah, but I think we have to be mindful of our interests and realize that yes, there are things which you have to take a stand on, but one shouldn't take stand for the sake of staying.
No. I think if I were somebody in India, I would ring up Mr. Trump and say, look, this is hurting us big time. Our country cannot afford it. We've got 6 or 7 days of reserves with us. What are we going to do? In the process, you're destroying us. So come, do something, and to resolve this situation as quickly as possible. But we have not done that. If at all, Trump tells us what India is doing. You see, this is very unfortunate. And this is what worries me, that we have no voice at all. We're not ringing up anybody. Even the last time, it's Trump who called us, right? We're not called up Trump. We went to Israel. In between, there's no exchange between Trump and us and the Prime Minister. Why is that? I don't understand that. At least we can call up people. We are having talks with all the GCC countries. We're having a good dialogue with them. We can't talk to Trump. Why?
BRICS could have had an emergency meeting.
Yes.
There's a problem. No, the UAE is also a BRICS member. So the
true.
BRICS members themselves are at each other's
We won't be able to
throats.
get a resolution.
But you can call the meeting, sir. You don't need a resolution. India's
just seen
voice
us
should be
doing-
heard.
At least we should
to
be
say
doing
that
something.
we are attempting and link it to human security.
This is a problem.
We should bring it back to
It's
South
according
a,
to
it's a judgment call whether you should,
There's no empathy in the Indian position.
take cover when you know the consequences are going to be bad for you.
What are the consequences?
Or take a stand.
But Raghavan, there can be no worse consequence than what are happening today.
That's what I'm saying, that this is not something which you can control.
Correct.
You may ring up,
Yes.
but it is not going to make...
But you can at least see for the domestic audience, for the rest
Yes,
of the world.
yes, you
Please
can-
understand. I mean, foreign policy is not about just, there's also
the
a domestic
optics-
audience to address. There is also the international community to address. What do others think of us? That also
the
is important.
optics of your policy can be...
Yeah, that's what I'm
There's
saying.
no empathy in our positions.
Yeah, there's none,
That is something
zero.
which I think is very, very disappointing.
This is what is unfortunate, and that's all that my sort of view on this subject is. What do you say? And then what are you doing in the ultimate analysis? If tomorrow Pakistan has a defense deal with Saudi Arabia, supposing Turkey comes on, what happens? I mean, Pakistan has gained, according to me, gained much more in this scenario than us, and that's not good for India.
No, I mean,
That's a subject for a whole new debate.
No, I'm just saying.
I have a different view. I don't think we should see what is happening in West Asia through the prism of India-Pakistan differences, because in that case we will distort the picture. The fact is, Pakistan was deeply and very adversely impacted by what is happening. it has stakes in that region which are much more than ours, because it has a huge border with Iran.
Of course.
And major consequences to Iran's integrity have a dramatic impact on
The large
Pakistan.
Shia population.
Large Shia pop, but that's not only in Pakistan. There are other Gulf countries which have large Shia populations.
Finally, it has a certain position because of the fact that it does not have relations with Israel, which makes it more acceptable to
Whatever
Iran.
it is, whatever
to Iran.
it is.
So those factors, made it possible for it to be nimble-footed and put itself forward as a board of
I'm worried
peace
about
member.
Turkey joining into this alliance.
I
I'm a
think
little worried about that.
they well may, because it would be dependent on their own threat perceptions.
I think, one of the interesting things that's happened is, in a way, Pakistan was always seen as a player in the Middle East. And I think we've forgotten that, which is going back to the one reason people say for partition was the fact that Pakistan would be more amenable, Muslim League would be more amenable to join the Cold War alliances. And the Cold War alliances, the CATO, CENTO, were linked to the question of oil resources in the Middle East. Therefore, having on the flank Pakistan on your side. So that's the reason why Pakistan was a member of the Baghdad Pact, then became a member of the CENTO. It has been part of the protectorate force, supporting force for the Saudis. So I think they had a much longer involvement. So I don't think that fundamentally changes. Our balance has actually shifted in India's favor. I would say, if you see, today Pakistan is stuck at $400 million GDP. They're under the 26th IMF program. To say I've got some small diplomatic victory doesn't change.
I don't think they have a diplomatic victory. I'm not
that's
worried
people
about
are saying
that.
Look, they've got, they're playing a big role, but their fundamental weakness.
The problem is that Pakistan's strategic position, they're in a sweet position. You have China, which deals with them as a country which is going to protect them in every sense. The Americans deal with them because the Americans have great strategic interests there, right? They are close to Turkey, right? And therefore, even though they have gone to the IMF several times over, they will continue to get help. There's no doubt about it.
So what is the point of being in a geopolitical sweet spot? This is the term which people used to use with regard to India also at one time, a few years ago. But with regard to Pakistan, when their internal situation is so badly
I agree with you. I agree.
There are problems with Afghanistan.
Yeah, I know.
They have a certain nimble-footedness because of their capacity to securitize issues, and that helps while dealing with the external environment, and that has made them very useful to the US in the past.
So you think that the Chinese presence there and the proximity of the US has no strategic implications as far as India is concerned?
I think it does. I think we should begin with the assumption that Pakistan is a major geopolitical factor in our neighborhood.
That's correct.
If we think it is irrelevant, as we started thinking,
That's right.
then we are going to compound
That's the
our...
point I was trying to make.
So I don't think it's irrelevant. It has always been a major player. It's the 5th largest country in the world, and we should deal with it as such, as a real problem, not something to be brushed away or to be ignored, and then we are surprised as to why other countries are paying it attention.
Yeah, I mean, calling them a broker or making these kind of noises is not the kind of language that we should normally use.
In any case, it doesn't help in your dealings with Pakistan. It
But
maybe
just
helps
now-
domestically.
But I'm saying for now,
I don't even think it helps domestically, quite frankly.
hypothetically, I'm saying in the current scenario, if Egypt, Turkey and Pakistan are able to play a constructive role and the Hormuz hypothetically is
It's a good
open,
thing.
we should welcome it.
Yes, I agree.
So I'm saying our responses should not become a function of domestic politics. I said this on
It
your show
always
last
is.
time also. And that is the unfortunate part. One gets the sense that much of the choice of word and phrase, which is coming out from the Modi government now, seems to be in a way influenced by the domestic. There's an election coming up in West Bengal.
Elections are,
So I think that is the unfortunate part
I
again.
just want to add, I think the Arab and Muslim countries, they're also utterly compromised. To say, for example, you mentioned Gaza earlier. It was the Arab and Muslim countries, 8 of them, including Pakistan and Indonesia, which drafted a resolution where virtually you accepting Israeli-American
I know
position,
that, I know.
which then gave the Americans the chance to go to Security Council and say, let's make a board of peace, and one man will run the show.
That's right.
So it is not as if these guys are principled in their support for Palestine.
No, they've let them down, if you ask me.
Yeah.
They've let them
They've
down.
actually
Let them
abandoned
down,
them.
abandoned
So I don't think we should overestimate in that sense their role, but it's important to see what's going on.
I think that we've had a very, very interesting discussion, and let's hope that tomorrow Trump doesn't change the parameters of the contours of this discussion.
You've got 10 days.
10 days. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.